Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu, and this week we have a ton of content to look forward to. Almost too much as it pertains to me, just as far as making content goes. It's just a bit too close together. So I would like to have a deck for every class for Twist, a deck for every class for Wild with Caverns of Time, a deck for every class for the Heroic Tavern Brawl, but it's all coming out so close together that I just can't do that for all of these situations at the quality that I want to get it to you. So I've decided to pick just one, and that's going to be Twist. With Wilds, I think Caverns of Time is a little bit less interesting because a handful of classes are getting absurd support. So as far as like, we could come up with a bunch of interesting stuff to look at, but as far as like putting it into practice, it's going to get blown out of the water by the stuff that's actually meta relevant. But Twist, the format is wide open, and a lot of you probably weren't playing at the time. So this Twist format is called Wonders. It's set at Mean Streets of Gadgetzan and before, plus the new Caverns of Time set. So Caverns of Time is a collection of buffs from that time period, as well as a few additional cards designed to go with the archetypes of that time. So it's a blast from the past with a twist. So I think the Twist format is going to be really cool, both if you have some nostalgia for that time period, or if you're excited at the concept of a wide open terrain with whole new stuff. Because even if we don't factor in the Caverns of Time stuff, we have a ton of buffs just from over the years. You know, Priest looks completely different. I don't know if any of you remember, but until Knights of the Frozen Throne, which is still like a year out from this time period, Priest was awful. So like all of its cards were trash, and they've all been buffed since then. So Priest looks a lot better. It has like finishers, that type of thing. Also, there was a Wild rotation at this time. So as Whispers of the Old Gods was coming out, they did the first Wild rotation. Not only are we seeing these cards improved, some new cards, but we're seeing a combination of sets that has never existed as a standard format before. So yeah, this is all really cool. I love all these updates. I'm super excited for Twist as a mode, and I want to get you guys excited. So I have actually put a lot of thought into these decks. Not that I don't usually, but like I really wanted to get you all some quality starting off points. I think that a lot of this stuff is going to change once we play with it, but I sought a lot of advice from some peers, and I have some of what I think are really good starting off lists for every class. So without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we have Druid. So Druid actually had a ton of archetypes back then that I think are pretty iconic. One of them is like Cthulhu, is probably pretty interesting to build around. The one big one that just isn't here is the Force of Nature Savage War combo, because Force of Nature doesn't work like it used to. So what I thought was going to be the most fun to build with this was Jade Druid with all the updates. You're going to see a recurring theme here of Worgen Greaser. This card is nuts for the time period. Back then, there was less healing, the removal was weaker. Getting on board early and being able to trade into things mattered way more than it does now. Now we have just like absolutely absurd broken board clears. We can come back from things pretty reliably in most classes, but back then, the pace of the game is determined by the strongest plays at certain levels. So for example, in early Hearthstone like Classic, Yeti was a good card because it traded into Azure Drake so well. You know, Azure Drake was a pretty ubiquitous card because there really wasn't anything better for most classes to do at 5 mana. So if you had your Yeti out on 4, it makes it a lot harder for your opponent to play an Azure Drake on 5 and have it matter. So for this format, Worgen Greaser I think is that card. Removal does not deal with it well. Other minions around that cost, for the most part, do not trade into it well. I think if you stick a Worgen Greaser on curve, it's going to matter a lot. So anyways, you're going to see Worgen Greaser in several of these lists, and I think it's going to be a very meta warping card. So Jade Druid is really fun, really iconic. Yogg was nerfed and reverted. Ancient of Lore was nerfed, and not only was its nerf reverted, but its health restoration and stats were improved. So this was a 7 mana 5/5 that drew 1 at one point, like during this time period. Now it's one of the better healing cards. It's one of the better tempo plus draw cards. And with new Cenarian Hold, you can play the hold on a previous turn and then get both effects out of the Ancient of Lore, tempo while you get draw, while you get health restoration, much like Ultimate Infestation from the following year. But yeah, we got a bunch of other buffs. Aya is better than it used to be. Jade Behemoth comes down a turn earlier. Emperor Thorson coming down a turn earlier. We didn't get an Innervate replacement, but we did get a Wild Growth replacement. So we have a slightly better Wild Growth to replace the Wild Growth that was taken a bit after this. Druid still has its Invigorate onto into 4-drop game plan. But anyways, this is Jade Druid. You want to get bigger and bigger things going. Your Cenarian Hold is going to make your Kun the Forgotten King, Ancient of Lore, Nourish all really powerful. Feral Rage is actually one of the better healing cards of this time period, just graded on a curve. And then if all else fails, you always have Yogg-Saron. So I think this is pretty cool. You could build Jade Druid around Auctioneer, but given Ancient of Lore Revert and the Cenarian Hold combination with Ancient of Lore and Nourish, I don't think you need it. So yeah, pretty well rounded. Druid probably going to be good, even if it doesn't look quite like this. I think Druid is going to be one of the better classes. Then for Hunter, we have Face Hunter. So Undertaker was nerfed before this time period, and Ball of Spiders cost twice as many mana. So we're going to get to see Undertaker into like Leper Gnome Web Spinner into Ball of Spiders type of shenanigans, or you know, that type of thing. I think that it has a lot of real potential to just run away with games based on the Undertaker into Ball of Spiders curve. The Glaivezooka in this picture is showing +2 attack. That was temporary. That was like mistakenly led into the patch last week, and there were some others like that, but this one was reverted. So a handful of them, like Swipe, was changed to 3 mana, and that was reverted too. So Glaivezooka is going to give +1 attack, but it's still one of the better weapons for an aggressive hunter deck of this time. And there are a lot of other things you could consider, but you can't run all of them. So like, I don't have the Houndmaster in here. I don't have Quick Shot in here. There's a lot of room to kind of experiment with, but I really wanted to build around Undertaker and Ball of Spiders. Also, Dreadscale and Acid Maw I think are really, really good. The Jormungers card that tutors them both out I think is really slow, and if you draw one of them, it becomes bad. So it's not worth cutting beasts for, in my opinion, for a deck that's trying to be as fast as this one is. So yeah, it's just Undertaker Hunter with some updates. We're trying to delete the opponent's life as fast as possible. Next up, we have Freeze Mage. So the first deck I built was Mech Mage, because that is the mage archetype I have nostalgia for from way back when, but I gotta say, it looked super outdated, even for Twist. Mechs did get like a new mech, and you know, there's Leviathan and stuff, but just putting it together, I looked at it and I thought, this is the type of thing that I should work on to have some fun with mechs. It's not the type of thing that I should recommend to you guys. So back to the drawing board, and Mage actually has probably a really strong archetype in Freeze Mage. There's a lot of other things to consider for this deck, like I don't have Alexstrasza or Tony in. I don't think we need them because Street Trickster is absurd in the context of Twist. This cheap for that much spell damage is just absolutely ridiculous for the time period. But we do have things like Alex and Antonidas to consider, and also Flame Strike was buffed. It deals 5 damage now. So there's a lot of ways you could build Freeze Mage, and I even think that you could pull off a pretty good Reno Mage if you wanted to build that. There's just so many good cards now. But anyways, so this is Freeze Mage. Cone of Cold was buffed, so you kind of get a second copy of Frost Nova now. It was 4 mana at the time. Firelands Portal is one of the cards that did get to keep their accidental buff. This is a powerful card from that time as it was, but now it's going to deal 1 more damage and it's going to summon a slightly more expensive minion. So that was kind of like the chip damage tempo tool I wanted. It was going to be that or some combination of like Alexstrasza and Antonidas and other stuff. Forgotten Torch I think is a little slow. What's nice about it is that it's cheap. The reason that I have Fireballs in here over Forgotten Torch is because Fireballs clear Worgen Greaser, and I think that matters a lot. So yeah, how much of these defensive tools you actually need remains to be seen, but I think that this will be a really good starting off point for Freeze Mage. Next up, we have Cards Paladin. Stand Against Darkness is actually 4 mana. That got buffed. It's showing as 5 mana in this picture, but it's actually 4. This is Secret Paladin, but we have some updates. So we've got like a dude's package with Muster for Battle, Warhorse Trainer, and Stand Against Darkness. I do not have Quartermaster in here, and that is because I can't fit infinite cards in this deck. And Warhorse Trainer is going to be pretty hard hard to remove if you protect it with even a couple of the guys. So I think Muster for Battle into Warhorse Trainer or Stand Against Darkness into Warhorse Trainer is going to be really, really powerful. And Muster for Battle and Stand Against Darkness are just kind of decent on their own in this time period, and especially with like Knife Juggler. So you get all that. Wicker Flame Burn Bristle at +1/+1 might still not be a great card, but I do think that 3 mana 3/3 Divine Shield Taunt, even without the lifesteal, is a pretty decent on-curve play for back then. So it's worth experimenting with. And then we have Rooney in there. Rooney I think is really good. And then the rest of this is just kind of what to play after you play Mysterious Challenger, which is coming down a turn earlier by the by. In Wild, Mysterious Challenger continued to be a really strong card even a year or two later. So for this time period, coming down a turn sooner, and then we have an improved Cairn Bloodhoof into Dr. Boom into Tyrion Forging. Pretty fun nostalgic deck in my opinion. Next up we have Reno Priest, and Reno Priest is like really confusing to figure out because it has had a complete facelift. All of these cards are way better than they used to be. There are a ton of cards that I didn't even include, like Shadow Madness. Is Shadow Madness a ridiculous card at 1 less mana in this time period? I have no idea. But Reno Priest was like a hipster deck at the time. It was like Renolock for people who didn't want to be Renolock players. And it was all right into a bunch of the things that Renolock was good into, except that it would always lose to Renolock. Renolock would just solo Reno Priest with Jiraxxus. Priest did not have a good closer. I know that there's like Spawn of Shadows, Justicar, Shadow Form, Finley shenanigans. It's called Chancy Priest. And that could give you like an out to that matchup. But it's not like that was good, right? That was just a pile of clunk. Now we have like good stuff to do. Confessor Paletress coming down and getting 2 minions immediately if you can play her the same turn that you inspire is good, but also Murazond is just one of the most powerful clears in the game right now. You're discovering a big dragon, clearing the board, making a 6/6, and so you can just win out on tempo now. Speaking of tempo, we do have the Worgen Greaser in here, so we have like a Blackwing Technician into Worgen Greaser into Blackwing Corruptor type of ideal curve. Blackwing Corruptor is huge. I'm actually spoilers, I picked Cthulhu Warrior for this video because I'm most excited for Cthulhu Warrior, but I actually feel like Dragon Warrior has a huge amount of potential in this format given the buff to Blackwing Corruptor. So anyways, dragons I think are going to be really good, especially considering like your opponent plays Worgen Greaser on their turn 4, and then on your turn 5 you can actually clear it with a Blackwing Corruptor, because Corruptor was changed from 3 damage to 5 damage, which is huge for this format. So yeah, dragon deck's probably really good. While one of Priest's biggest weaknesses at the time was how awful its early game was. They iconically don't have any good 2-drops. But now Priest has so many good 1-drops that I didn't even include them all in this deck. You could, and we did, run Zombie Chow and Mistress of Mixtures at the time, but now we have, in addition to Norshire Cleric and Twilight Whelp as ideal 1-drops, we also have Psychic Conjurer and Crimson Clergy and Ship's Chirmungerburger. You know, like that card is going to be nuts. You stick it on 1 with any of your other 1-drops if you have the coin, and you just dictate the pace of the game for turns to come. So I almost think that if we went like Injured Blade Master with the Onyx Bishop that was buffed by a mana, so that's on 4 now, a tempo Dragon Priest is probably really good, like not arena one but a tempo one. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for that type of stuff. Like Priest has a ridiculous early game compared to how it used to, and it's going to be really hard to identify just how good it's going to be without having played it. So yeah, this is my first attempt at making a Reno Priest list. I think it's going to be pretty good. You could explore a N'Zoth package with this, but I opted for a tempo dragon build. All right, next up we have Jade Rogue, and this is one of the ones that I took the biggest risk on just because it got a lot of really cool stuff. But Water Rogue was really good at the time. That was Finja, the Flying Star, with Murloc Warleader and Bluegill just as a tempo play, combined with some stealth stuff and some pirates. And we have big improvements on that. For one, Old Murkai was rotated to Wild before now. It's in this format now. So Finja the Flying Star gets a bigger, more exciting thing to pull. Small Time Buccaneer, which was nerfed almost immediately back then, has been buffed. And we have this whole new exciting Jade package. So Jade Swarmer, stealth matters for this deck with Shadow Sensei. Jade Shuriken deals more damage. Jade Swarmer costs half the mana. And we have a Jade Telegram card, which combined with preparation or just on curve, if you're playing some Jades before or after it, is pretty good at messing with your opponent's game plan and setting you up for big Jades later on. This looks pretty cool. Like, I'm really excited for Jades, both in Twist and Wild, once we get the Jade Telegram. But yeah, this looks like it could be fun. A new twist on Water Rogue with some Jades. Next up, we have Shaman, and Shaman was one of the decks, surprisingly, that I had the most fun putting together. When I was talking to my peers about it, we kept going in circles building this thing. Like, there are so many more options that didn't actually make it into this deck. You can build it probably a much lower curve. You can build it with more Jades, you can build it with less Jades. There's a ton of stuff to do with this. So yeah, I'm excited to both play this deck, but also kind of figure out what an ideal build looks like. So something about Spirit Claws. Spirit Claws at the time was good because you could play it with Thalnos, but also if you rolled the spell damage totem, you could get the bonus attack on it. And Spirit Claws eventually got nerfed because of all that. So although we do get the spell damage totem from Totally Totems, we do not get it out of the hero power anymore, but we do have Totally Totems. So you can play the Spirit Claws and either play your Blood Mage Thalnos, or you can, on some of your later charges, you can get the spell damage out of the Totally Totems. In a faster list, like if we cut down a bunch of the curve, I think it's worth considering like the Trickster card that we were using in the Freeze Mage list earlier, the 3 mana +2 spell damage, and consider including things like Maelstrom Portal and Lightning Storm alongside our Totally Totem stuff. So like there's just so much to do with this. I went with a more tempo focused build because I think Totally Totems into Thing from Below is going to be nuts. You only need one other totem for a Thing from Below to be free if you've played Totally Totems. So that's really big. Something I couldn't get everyone else on board with was Sea Giant. So like this is something that I have a lot of faith in, but everyone I was talking to was like, no, they don't see it. But Sea Giant, Totally Totems by itself discounts this thing halfway. If your opponent has any stuff out, if you had any stuff out, you discount it further. If you have Thing from Below in your hand when you play Totally Totems, it discounts the Sea Giant even more. So I think since we're going so wide, Totally Totems is a good incentive to run things like Sea Giant as long as we're building for cheap Thing from Belows anyway. What you may be noticing isn't in here is Thunderbluff Valiant. So Thunderbluff Valiant is a basically permanent bloodlust on your totems that does it again whenever you inspire, and the reason it didn't make the cut is because you can't curve it with Totally Totems. Totally Totems overloading you 1 means that Thunderbluff Valiant can't come down the turn right after because you're overloaded. It could very well be that it's worth cutting everything north of Draenei Totem Carver and running Thunderbluff Valiant instead, but we have to try it. You know, there's so much to try in this area. Tuskar Totemic is bad because it's only getting you a basic totem, but it's good because it's creating 2 bodies at 1 less mana. This was a 3 mana 3/2 at the time before it got nerfed. So it's creating 2 bodies, which also helps with Sea Giant. It's creating more totems, which helps with Thing from Below and Draenei Totem Carver. So yeah, we're just trying to go wide with totems in order to buff all of these other big chonkers. Alakir, I was expecting to feel a lot better in the context of Twist, but there just aren't cards I want to put in my deck for this. I was really excited at first because I had deckhands in here and I was thinking, oh, it'll draw the deckhand, but deckhand doesn't come with charge, right? It gains it if you have a weapon. So I don't think Alakir draws deckhand. The best Divine Shield option is Argent Squire. I think Argent Horse Rider is okay. It's also a charge minion, but Argent Squire is like no impact off of Alakir. The reason I got so excited for Alakir for Twist is mostly Thing from Below. So once you played some totems, you get to the stage of the game where you play Alakir and you're going to draw a free Thing from Below to play when you play your Alakir. So I think that's at least pretty good. I just didn't want it to draw only 1 card, so that's how Leroy got into this list. So after you play your Alakir, you're guaranteed to have the Leroy burst to go with your hero power burst, and I think that'll be pretty good late game. Also, like, because you get the Wind Fury on your hero, all of your weapons in here cycle through so much faster. So if you get the spell damage out along with Spirit Claws, you're gonna get to push for 6 damage if you play that after the Alakir comes down. So yeah, I think Shaman has just a 1,000 different ways you could build it. I think it's going to be really exciting to tinker around and see what the right build of mid-range Shaman is supposed to be. Next up, we have Renolock, and I gotta say, yeah, I was a little disappointed when I built this because like it looks pretty decent for its time, but it doesn't look very improved. It looks about the same, you know. It just feel like everything else is caught up with it. And what really hammered it in is I put Shadowbolt in. It hit me that it doesn't even clear Worgen Greaser. So your opponent plays Worgen Greaser, and what's your answer? If you have Siphon Soul, great. Otherwise, you're just crying. So something you could put in here to help mitigate that issue is Blast Crystal Potion, and I just couldn't bring myself to let it into the final version of this, considering the buff to Siphon Soul. But people did play Blast Crystal Potion at the time, and even though Siphon Soul exists as a strictly better by miles version of that, this is a Reno deck. You can't run the 2 copies, so Blast Crystal Potion as a scuffed second copy of Siphon Soul might still be worth running. But we have our own Worgen Greaser, we have some other improved elements like Hellfire is cheaper than it used to be, Dark Bomb gets you stuff. The late game is up for debate. I couldn't get anyone on board with N'Zoth. I think that N'Zoth has some actually real potential, and you don't really even need to change anything. Maybe you put in a piloted Shredder, but then you're getting, you know, Sludge Belcher, Karen Bloodhoof, the Boombots back when you play N'Zoth as your late game. But I went with, for this version, mostly just Jiraxxus to cover your late game, because back at this time, Jiraxxus was so much worse. It set you to 15, which most of the time healed you for about the armor that you get from this hero. We're talking like, it could be like you healed for 10 if you were at 5 health, but usually you were lucky to get, you know, 5 to 7 healing out of this if playing it didn't set you up to die regardless. So you're healing about as much, maybe a little bit less, but you're not damaging yourself. So like before, if you were at like 20 health, you had to think like, do I play the Jiraxxus just to, you know, get your tempo? Because hero cards didn't exist yet. It had like a unique effect where it became your hero and hard caps your hero at 15 health. That's why the Chansey Priest thing kind of worked, is because that could deal 16 damage. It was like a 4 million card combo, but but you know, you could deal the Jiraxxus damage with your Chansey Priest. Now you don't have to set yourself to 15. You don't have to be low to justify playing Jiraxxus. You know, you just play him, and once you have played him, if you get low afterwards, you can still Reno Jackson to get back to 30. After you play Jiraxxus, Reno Jackson heals you to 15. So anyways, Jiraxxus covering the late game. We have the Abyssal Enforcer, Twisting Nether, kind of like late game clears that were iconic at the time. We have the new Witch of the Archthief that's really good at keeping you from dying early. And as a finisher, we have Leroy, Power Overwhelming, Faceless Manipulator. And the improvement to this was Emperor Thorson costing a mana cheaper. So it's just going to be a lot more flexible to set yourself up to play all those cards in one turn to deal the iconic 20 damage wombo. I don't know for certain if that's going to be the best Warlock late game. It could be that cutting Leroy, cutting Power Overwhelming, and maybe cutting Faceless for N'Zoth and Piloted Shredder will be better, because I like the idea of having cards that you can kind of just play when you need to play them. The Leroy combo, like Power Overwhelming can be okay. Leroy is almost never good outside of killing the opponent. And Faceless Manipulator requires you to have something to target. So like vaguely flexible by just a bunch of death rattles that you play on curve anyway. And then if it goes late, you just slam down N'Zoth and have this huge board that's hard to remove. Could be better. I don't know that it is, but it could be. We do have Chamber of Viscidus, something like that. The new location, which is just broken. It's an absurd card. I don't think that Twist has the healing to make a reliable Cho'Gall combo. You could build for that, but it's just such a great draw card in a time period where draw was pretty hard. You know, like we're already in the class that has one of the easiest draw just because of the hero power at the time, but this allows you to damage yourself a little bit less, draw a few more cards, and hopefully find your Leroy combo when you need it. And finally, we have Cthulhu Warrior. So this is another one that's a little tough to build just because it has so many good options now. Before it was easier because you had a few decent Cthulhu activators and a bunch of like awful options that you would pretty much just cut. Now a lot of them are better. Like I didn't even include the taunt one that came down a mana, which I think is interesting because it goes with whirlwind effects. And it's just really hard to fit everything in. So like I think Death Spite might be good. You could play it on 4, kill something, and then it sets itself up to kill a greaser the turn after. More of a good going first play than a going second play, I guess. But anyway, so Bash here is showing 3 mana, but it's actually 2 mana. I built this like I knew it, right? Like I was trying to build a control warrior, Cthulhu Warrior, but as I was putting it together, I feel like there's some very real potential for Cthulhu Warrior to be a tempo deck. Like Cthulhu coming down 2 turns sooner is huge. Eye Stalk of Cthulhu is a pretty big body for what it is. Even on curve, it has a lot of high potential, but as the game goes on, it starts to get ridiculous. buffs, and healing is a premium back then, so it could be that we need to build for this more. There's a 3 mana 3/4 that buffs Cthulhu at the end of your turn that we could be running. We could cut Bash and maybe Shield Block, maybe Emperor Thorson, maybe Shield Slam, and run some more minions to get on board sooner, like Working Greaser, and just, you know, be a tempo deck that kind of has some resilience to burst and whatnot with the armor from like Ancient Shield Bearer and stuff like that. So yeah, I built this like kind of a control mid-rangey deck. I cut the brawls. I know you're probably looking at this and you're like, where are the brawls? Whenever I don't include brawl in any warrior deck, people are, even today, you know, in Wild, where brawl is hot garbage, people are like, oh, where's the brawl? Yeah, so like I cut the brawls because brawls are kind of bad, and I wanted to maybe leverage the improved tools like Bash and Slam having 1 less mana. Oh yeah, Slam is showing us 2 mana here. It's actually 1 mana also. So Bash is a 2, Slam is at 1, and they both combo so well with unnerfed Execute. So we got some of the most premium removal in the game. We have some of the best, most premium healing in the game. Maybe we're a little weak on draw, I'm not sure. But otherwise, I feel like just as a tempo, mid-rangey control deck, Cthulhu Warrior has a lot of potential. And this is like my starting off point. I could see cutting Emperor Thorson and Bran. Probably not Bran, to be honest. It's good with like everything in this deck. But I could see maybe cutting Emperor Thorson. I just couldn't resist the idea of being able to reliably play Bran with Cthulhu. Because Cthulhu at 10, you have to get 2 triggers off of Emperor Thorson to play them both together, but now you only need 1, and it doesn't even need to hit both of them. If you Emperor Thorson with Bran or Cthulhu in hand, you're dealing a ton of damage when you play them together. So yeah, this has a lot of potential. I think this is a decent starting off point. It could be that we need to build a little bit more control-y. It could be that we need to build a little bit more mid-rangey, but I'm so excited to play with Cthulhu. All right, so that was a Wonders Twist deck for every class. I'm so excited to play Twist. I hope you are too. I put a lot of effort into these lists. I hope that if any of them excited you, that they work out for you, or at least like a good starting off point, you know, to get into Twist. For me, I'm probably going to start off with Cthulhu Warrior on the day of. So when Twist comes out, I'm gonna play Cthulhu Warrior. Some kind of mid-range Shaman is like undoubtedly going to be the best deck. So if you want like a recommendation as far as like getting to Legend, invest in mid-range Shaman, because that's going to be pretty reliable. It was really good for a really long time, and many of its cards have been improved since then. But yeah, that about wraps things up. I'm looking forward to Twist. Remember to like and subscribe to support the channel, and thank you so much for watching.